The Zephyrian Grand Fleet hung in space like a constellation of death, their obsidian hulls drinking in the light of distant stars. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, his 4 eyes fixed on the small blue world that had dared to refuse the Dominion's ultimatum. "Status report," he commanded, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. "All vessels report ready, Admiral. 500 dreadnoughts, 2,000 cruisers, and support craft numbering in the tens of thousands. The human world has no orbital defenses left. Their pitiful fleet was scattered in the opening engagement." Kethvar's satisfaction was palpable. The humans had proven surprisingly resilient for such a young species, but their defiance would end here. This backwater colony called Haven would serve as an example to any world that dared resist Zephyrian supremacy. Begin the bombardment. Target population centers first. Leave their agricultural zones. We'll need slaves to work them. The weapons arrays of the massive fleet began to charge, energy readings spiking across 1,000 ships. The very fabric of space seemed to tremble with the accumulated power of the Dominion's war machine. But something was wrong. "Admiral," his tactical officer's voice carried an edge of confusion, "we're detecting an anomaly near the planet's surface." The main screen shifted, zooming in on Earth's atmosphere. There, impossibly suspended in the vacuum of space without any visible life support, was a human child. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old by human standards, wearing what appeared to be a simple white dress that fluttered despite the absence of any atmosphere. Her dark hair moved gently around her shoulders as if touched by an unfelt breeze. Most unsettling of all were her eyes, ancient beyond her apparent years, holding depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. "How is that creature surviving in vacuum?" Kethvar demanded. "Unknown, Admiral. Our sensors detect no environmental suit, no protective field generators. She appears to be breathing." The child raised her small hand, and across the vast distance of space, every weapon system in the Zephyrian fleet simply stopped. The energy buildups that had been moments away from unleashing planetary devastation simply dissipated. "Weapon status," Kethvar roared. "All systems are non-responsive, sir. No damage detected, no external interference. They simply won't fire." The child began to speak, and impossibly her voice carried across the void to reach every ship in the fleet simultaneously. She spoke not in the harsh clicks and whistles of Zephyrian, but in her own human language. Yet every being understood her perfectly. "You came here to hurt my family," she said, her voice carrying the simple clarity that only children possessed. "You want to break our homes and take our friends away." Kethvar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest. Uncertainty. "Analysis." How is she projecting her voice? How is she disabling our weapons? But his crew was transfixed by the child's words. "My daddy says that when someone tries to hurt your family, you stand up to them. So I'm standing up to you." She paused, tilting her head with childish curiosity. "Why do you want to hurt people? Doesn't it make you sad?" Across the fleet, hardened warriors who had participated in dozens of planetary conquests found themselves struggling with an emotion they had thought long dead: empathy. The child's innocence was like a mirror, reflecting back the horror of what they had done, what they were about to do. "She's just a youngling," whispered the weapons officer, his voice barely audible. "She's trying to protect her world." Kethvar fought against the strange compulsion that seemed to be affecting his crew. "Focus, she's using some form of psychic manipulation." All ships switched to backup weapon systems. But the backup systems wouldn't respond either. Across the massive fleet, not a single weapon could be brought to bear. The child simply stood there in space, a tiny figure before an armada that could crack worlds, and she was winning through nothing more than her presence. "You know," the child continued conversationally, "my teacher says that fighting doesn't really solve anything. She says the best way to stop a fight is to make friends instead." The girl smiled with heartbreaking sweetness. "Would you like to be friends?" Something fundamental shifted in that moment. The Admiral felt a crack form in his worldview. Decades of indoctrination crumbling before the simple honesty of a child's question. Around him, his crew stood in stunned silence. "Sir," the communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving stand-down orders from multiple vessels across the fleet." "What?" "The crews they're refusing to fight, Admiral. Captain Thexnell of the Dominator says he won't fire on a world that produces children brave enough to stand against an entire fleet, armed with nothing but hope." More reports flooded in. Ship after ship powered down their weapons, their crews overcome by something they had never expected to find in war: conscience. The child seemed to sense the change. She smiled wider and began to float closer to the flagship, moving through space as easily as if she were walking through a garden. "I knew you weren't really bad," she said, and her voice now carried warmth instead of sadness. "Bad people don't feel sorry when you ask them to. You were just scared and angry, weren't you?" Admiral Kethavar felt something wet on his face and realized with shock that he was crying. A biological response he had thought bred out of his species generations ago. "What are you?" he whispered. The child's answer was simple. "I'm Emma. I live on the farm down by Miller's Creek with my mom and dad and my dog Charlie. We grow the best apples in 3 sectors." She paused thoughtfully. "Would you like some? Mom always makes way too many pies." The Admiral looked around his bridge at his crew, seeing in their faces the same transformation he felt in his own heart. For the first time in his military career, he gave an order he never thought he would give. "All ships, stand down. Recall all fighters. We're going home." As the great fleet began to turn away from Haven, Admiral Kethavar took one last look at the child floating impossibly in space. She waved at him with the casual friendliness of a neighbor saying goodbye, and he found himself waving back. The Zephyrian Grand Fleet departed that day without firing a single shot. They never attacked another human world again. And somewhere in the Dominion's records filed under anomalous encounters was a single-line entry: "Recommend avoiding all human colonies. They have children." Some conquests, it turned out, worked both ways.